We're back live. It is the 7th day of December 2013. My name is Doug Owen, and this is our live edition of Blacklisted Radio. It's Saturday morning. It's good to be here, dusting the cobwebs off my brain and hopping back in the studio, the rebuilt studio at the new home-based location. Might be a little echoey, but, it's just good to be here. We are live on our backup Ustream channel. I haven't used it, but it was a good thing that we had already signed up and had all of that going. So the live listeners at blacklistedраdio.com can interact. What's up, Ban Jovi, CP304, Delnick, God Dogs, and the rest of them hanging out there. Probably more alongside as the show progresses. We're about 25 minutes late, but that's okay. It's a podcast. And I want to thank everybody for being troopers and hanging out despite technical glitches and other things that usually, plague the show. Actually, we've been really lucky using Spreaker, and I've never had any trouble with it. But today, for whatever reason, we cannot connect. Last night, myself and Charlie McGrath were able to do Doomcast number 19 in the new studio and had no problem doing that. So I don't know what the deal is. Maybe some caching. Regardless, we've got a lot to get into today, as per usual. So let's just start talking about the news items of the day, of the week. Trying to wrap up, I don't know what, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 days into one show is going to be challenging, to say the least. So let's just talk about Nelson Mandela. I think that it's important to look at the media reaction and the complete distraction that this has become. Not to say that what he accomplished in his life wasn't historic. In some cases, very commendable. But the grandizing of Mr. Nelson Mandela and his cause and his legacy, I think, is just pure propaganda. The fact that this guy was a communist and a terrorist has been completely wiped from the discussion. Lee Rogers posted two pretty, I think, telling articles. And he said that, we had talked, and he said that he went into writing about Mandela pretty much from an ignorant standpoint, not knowing a whole lot about Nelson Mandela's life and not doing a lot of research into him, only as in his death, as most people, do we really start focusing on the life of someone. Although Nelson Mandela, global icon, very famous. He was the alleged rights activist that brought an end to apartheid, which is something that's commendable, but at the same time, the results of those actions are very questionable as to whether or not they're better for the people or how they. Living in slavery is really, really, really horrific. But another form of fascism and just destitution because of the revolution that they partook in. It wasn't necessarily a better situation. And I think it's a cautionary tale for all of us, something to look at and say, well, it sounds great. We do want to get rid of the power brokers, but what comes in as a result of those actions? What comes in the aftermath? And sometimes that can be a little bit more scary than what you're dealing with. And that's what happened in South Africa. It felt good to get rid of all of the white people, and most of the South Africans, the white population, was pretty much just, yanked from their jobs. They were taken aback by this huge transition, and many fled. I know a guy that fled South Africa, a few of them. Actually, one of my neighbors is a young lady from South Africa, and she's a new American, she's married to a guy, one of my neighbors, and they're trying to go through that whole process of actually going through legal citizenship. And just to hear those stories, you can imagine the things you have to do, the things you have to jump through to do that. But nonetheless, the idea that we get rid of all of the bad guys, all of the white people. It sounds great, especially if you're South African living under apartheid. But the infrastructure crumbled because the people that they put in positions of power that should have been at power companies, at utility districts, at businesses throughout the public system, the governmental system, were not adequate or up to doing the job. They weren't qualified for the positions that they put them in, and ultimately the infrastructure crumbled. So we talk about the accomplishments of Nelson Mandela, and you just have to kind of wonder what it would be like if apartheid or an awakening had transitioned South Africa into a freer state. As people become more and more aware of tyranny and apartheid, things do change because it just becomes politically unpleasant or not as easy to sell as it used to be. Slavery in most modern Western countries just kind of went out of style. The times had changed. The people didn't believe that this was morally acceptable. And things happened. It changed without the need for a civil war like we had here in the United States. There was a pretty easy and simple transition because people just became less apt to think that that's okay, or people just started morally challenging the years past and the old doctrines and the old ideas that slavery was okay and these people were not humans. So, it just transitioned. My point is that I don't really think that Nelson Mandela's crusade and what he did to end apartheid was necessarily that great. Not that I'm a supporter of apartheid. Don't get me wrong. I'm not, somebody that would want to live under apartheid. And if you look at modern day South Africa, it's out of control. It might not be apartheid, but it's complete robber baron fascism. It is, and it's enslavement by people of their own color that's enslaving different populations and different groups. And there's plenty of sectarian violence that is alive and well today. When we start looking at South Africa, it's out of control. You got genital mutilation. You've got just people hacking each other up. I can just go on and on and on about the crazy things that are happening in South Africa. So it's still it's not apartheid, but it's still really horrible. It's even maybe more brutal than it was under apartheid. So, pick your poison. But my grand point is that Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, all of these alleged progressives are hailing this man as a hero. And I give him his due accolades and, all of the credit for being in jail for all of those years, because that is crappy. If you believe in something and you're willing to spend your whole life in prison or a good chunk of it because of that belief, because of your actions, and I have to, kind of look at why he was in jail. They originally incarcerated Mr. Nelson Mandela because he was a terrorist, okay? He wasn't involved directly with the South African Communist Party. Plenty of pictures prove this. You don't really have to go to the Congress themselves, the Communist Party, but they themselves have admitted, quote, at his arrest in 1962, Nelson Mandela was not only a member of the underground African Communist Party, but was also a member of our party's central committee. To us as South African communists, Mandela shall forever symbolize the monumental contribution of the SACP in our liberation struggle, the party said in a statement reacting to Mandela's death. Well, if you just go and do a pretty cursory research attempt into finding out more and more about the SACP, it doesn't take you long to realize, my God, these people were doing some really, really heinous and horrible stuff. We're talking about killing women and children. And he was one of the central backers, one of the central players. And he was also an asset to the CIA. He was definitely working with Western leaders and communist leaders. The Russians and many of the other financial backers in the region were very, very interested in Nelson Mandela, in his history, as laid out in his in all of this coverage. Is I just don't think that we should be putting our flags at half-mast for this guy. And excuse me, the fact that the powers that be are so enamored with him and just gushing with commentary on Mr. Mandela and talking about how he was a friend. The Bill Clinton quote saying that he was able to get Bill Clinton to forgive the Republicans for his impeachment is just over the top. I mean, really? And funny enough, my wife actually referred me to a tweet at Bill Clinton that she saw saying, well, if Mandela was such a great friend of yours, why was he considered a terrorist under your regime? During the Bill Clinton presidency, Mandela was labeled a terrorist. So it doesn't shock me that people like Obama and Bill Clinton are good buddies with terrorists and they like what they have done. Because at the end of the day, this is the same kind of plan, same kind of strategy that the United States uses for global domination in the region. And so he was really just doing more of what, I think people like Bill Clinton would be more than, apt to do. I mean, go back to Serbia, go back to that time in the 90s and look at, some of the decisions that were being made. I mean, Bill Clinton aligned himself with a lot of terrorists. And if that's, how you do business, then it's no different than working with al-Nusra and al-Qaeda in Syria. But it really is insulting. It should be insulting to the average American to think that we're in, or to be told constantly that we're in this war on terror when so many of the people that are hero-fied by the establishment and the mainstream media happen to be, textbook definition terrorists. Nelson Mandela, like him, love him, hate him. I'm kind of indifferent on him. His tactics were so brutal that, but you could also argue that the apartheid and what was happening to the people under apartheid was so horrific that you had to use terrorism, that you had to use violence to bring people out of that. And that's their argument. The tactics, they were fair considering the situation. So that's not too shocking. But I think that the reaction by the media has been. All right, so that's enough about Nelson Mandela. The current situation around the world economically in Europe is not doing well, and domestically here in the United States, we have some pretty interesting things that are being thrown out there, like Senator Rand Paul's economic freedom zones. He's got a pretty interesting idea. Now, the profits, the wages relative to profits are at an all-time low. We'll get back to Rand Paul here, but this week we saw the fast food protests, the fast food worker protests, people working at Popeyes here in Austin, Texas. They were demanding, not really them, they only came after realizing there was a protest to join some of the protesters, and some of them did, and they had a little video op, a little TV package that they put together for the nightly news. You may have had one in your city, hometown. You might have had a little ruckus, people saying, I demand more and more and more. I want more money. I want $15 an hour to serve you people. It's not fair that I can not eat. I cannot afford the food that I produce. You think about that. Home builders, a lot of people. I'll give you an example. People that are carpenters build houses all the time that they cannot afford to live in. The huge, grandiose McMansions they would never, ever be able to afford. I work right now on equipment, electronic equipment, huge HVAC systems that would never, ever be affordable to somebody like myself. I wouldn't have the use for them, but there's auto workers that build Mercedes-Benz, I'm sure, that can't afford them. There's people that probably work at the Toyota plant that would have a hard time buying themselves an Acura. There's a lot of people that are in a very similar situation. So it sounds great, right? You want $15 an hour. I don't blame you. It's a living wage. And if I wasn't getting it from working at Popeyes or some other fast food chain, then I would do one of two things. I'd either get myself another job so that way I could supplement the income that I need to survive, or I would go to some kind of tech school. I would figure out what it is that I want to do, because obviously, your life should not be, at least in my mind, my life would not want to be defined by working at a fast food restaurant. It's a crappy job. Even in the best of scenarios, although management makes pretty good money. Had a buddy whose wife worked at Wendy's, and this was back in the late 1990s, and she was pulling $60,000, $70,000 a year. Worked her butt off, but not a bad deal. You have to deal with a bunch of high school kids or pissed off people that are being thrown back into the worker pool, people that are more seasoned, that do not want to work these jobs but are being forced to by economic desperation. Nonetheless, the whole dichotomy of this is pretty sad, because ultimately what happens is you realize that these people, their jobs that they have now, they have no clue. They're just being used as political pawns, and they are being used to justify the huge welfare state that we have in this country. But it's just a matter of time. Applebee's, they're moving towards just getting rid of waiters. What's the point? Are you tired of waiting or having somebody that wants a tip? It's about the bottom line. So they're going to be putting in these cute little iPads that you'll get to order your food from. And at some point, the job market in this country that depends on those fast food workers that are now reclassified, thanks to the number counters, as not construction, they're manufacturing jobs. So I guess they are manufacturing burgers or manufacturing products. But, I just watch all of this and you realize that, how sad it is, number one, that these people are stuck in these positions for whatever reason. If you're living, trying to live off a job at McDonald's, and you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s, it's got to be really, really, really hard. But I never thought that those jobs were designed for people to live off of. So how can you get so upset about getting paid horrible to do a pretty horrible job? I don't know. And beyond that, you look at waiters, they get paid a few dollars an hour. They might not get paid anything. Fast food worker might actually make more money, depending on the scenario and where they work, than somebody that's a waitress or a waiter or help, some kind of wait staff, a greeter that works off of that. Maybe even a bartender. Although Americans like a lot of alcohol, and there's a lot of money to be made there, so you probably would be better off. I mean, if you can flip burgers at Burger King, why can't you be a bartender? I don't get it. Are those jobs fewer and far between? But it goes back to this idea that we should get paid more for something that's becoming pretty antiquated quickly. And this is going to, these are, sadly enough, these are the jobs that are keeping the economy going. This is Bill Clinton's service-based economy. That's it. That's it. Once they outsource the, low-end service jobs wants technology, whether it's 3D printers, using an iPad, which is disgusting. You want a bunch of people all touching some pad ordering. I want a bunch of kids on there. They're going to be drooling on the thing. It's going to be broken. This is, and if you're going to Applebee's for the iPad, you're probably ignoring the fact that the food there is microwaved in bags. Eating good in the neighborhood? I don't think so. But anyway, so there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of them. If you look at a government, out-of-control government spending, and really the absolute crime and corruption that has plagued the public sector, look no farther than Detroit. Now, this week they decided that the courts decided that they can file bankruptcy and they can modify, wink, wink, those pension programs. Now, some of you out there listening to this program probably think, well, Doug, these people are kind of scumbags and they've retired at 55. They got 30 years to go and we got to pay them $125,000, $150,000, whatever it may be per year, some of them. And these are only a few people. They're the ones that are highlighted. Look at these scumbags. Yeah, there's 3 of those people, but the majority of people that work their whole lives for the city, some of you may have a little bit of compassion for, some of you may not. I have enough compassion to think that if you spend your whole life and somebody promises you something, that you're entitled to it. I don't know if you're going to get it. We don't, things don't always work out the way you want them to, but used to be in this country that you could rely on a pension because we had laws that were in place that would protect pensioners, retirees. Not so much. And so I don't like this trend, but I understand where Rand Paul is going with this. But this is the economic freedom zone idea. So this comes from WAPO. Senator Rand Paul vowed Friday to push a proposal to create economic freedom zones in Detroit that would slash taxes and regulatory red tape in an attempt to revive the city's economy. Speaking at the Detroit Economic Club, Mr. Paul, a potential 2016 GOP presidential candidate, he's asking his wife if it'll be okay. I read that on Reddit this morning. Said that the model could be used in cities and counties across the nation, and said that it would allow Detroit to hang on to $1.3 billion in tax revenue that otherwise would have been sent to the federal government. That's right, keeping money there. Quote, what Detroit needs to thrive is not Washington's domineering hand, but freedom from big government's mastery, the Kentucky Republican said. Quote, the answer to poverty and unemployment is not another government stimulus. It is simply leaving more money in the hands of those who earn it. Love it, right? All the overhead, all the money, all the bureaucracy, the red tape, the digs from the federal government into these coffers, though they return lots and lots of free money in the form of control and debt dependence and in tanks and other military equipment and hardware to oppress the people if they become ornery and upset, as they will in Detroit. The ones that are still there, the people who haven't fled, the people who didn't leave those 10,000 to estimations up to 70,000 empty buildings and homes. Now the Chinese are buying them up for pennies on the dollar, so don't worry. There might be something that'll thrive. And those Chinese economic corridors they're creating, we're going to talk about that in a moment, those people are going to be, not so apt to want to pay taxes. Now, if you want to keep the money in the local economy, that's fine. But if you exempt and you eradicate all of the overhead, you also are eradicating the tax base to pay the pensioners. Now, here's the other end of that argument. If you destroy this city to the point where there's no tax base, where nobody's paying into the Ponzi scheme, and you've got to have people paying into the Ponzi scheme, then what you have is a bunch of aborted promises, and you have the end for many of the people out there that are, retired. They're going to have to go back to work, or they are going to have to become another burden for the federal government. Now, I've said this often. This point, worrying about the federal deficit is almost moot. It doesn't really matter. The manipulation and the rigging of this system and the rampant creation and stimulus, wink, wink, of the economy has decimated any realistic ability for the American people themselves to pay back said debts. We are living in a world where we have debt saturation on not just a federal level, but a state level, a local level, communal, or county level. It is unbelievable. But this is from on high with this idea that you could just print your way into prosperity. You can indebt yourself into prosperity. And the money system we have today, ultimately, you have to create debt to create money. You have to indebt yourself to create. And dollar bills themselves have to be lent into existence. So on a micro, a macro, a personal, and a global level, most of the current fiat systems, the paper currencies markets, are nothing less than Ponzi schemes. So it's not a matter of when they fail, actually, it's not a matter of if they fail. It is just a matter of when they fail or when we transition to something else and something bigger. But this is also a big transition. This is going to be, I think, one of the first shots across the bow at allowing states and cities and governments to bankrupt. Does it have to happen? Do you have to get rid of the debt saturation? I don't think so. But if we continue down this path, places like Detroit are going to be decimated. So, I mean, I guess to argue for Rand Paul's point, if you don't do something, if you don't alleviate some of the pain, you're not going to bring any kind of businesses back to these regions. And you're going to have a lot more people that are on federal assistance, state assistance, and looking to, and ultimately, that will be at its mercy, and really just vocal advocates for more government and more state sponsored financier and central government planning. That's what they'll be yelling for, because that's what will be ultimately paying the bills. So, either scenario, somebody's going to have to pay the piper. Unfortunately, it's going to be those people that are ill-prepared, unaware, and are not willing to accept the new reality. It's going to be very hard for people to accept the new reality. So how far and how long will we get before these kind of real things start happening? We start seeing the massive amounts of people that are being told that, sorry, your check's not coming today. I don't know. And it also depends on how they restructure this. So Rand Paul, he could probably make a good name for himself, or at least show how libertarianism and allowing somewhat freer markets and less government and federal bureaucracy can actually empower an economic engine. And it can. It's just that there's going to be people that suffer, and there's going to be people that are going to be hurt by this. And so it's not to say that these solutions do not have victims. That is my grander point, if you will. So let's talk about some other things that are happening, some other economic solutions. One from the American dream here. The Chinese want to spend billions constructing a 600-acre, quote-unquote, China city in New York State. Sounds great, right? Hey, we got products coming over from China. Why don't we just get rid of global warming, reduce the carbon footprint, and start building stuff right here in this country? Why don't we just import fascism rather than exporting U.S. dollars? Sounds great to me. The Chinese have made trillions of dollars flooding our stores with super cheap products. I would say you have to blame the Americans that have been shoving super cheap, crappy products into their mouths and into their homes. But yes, they have made trillions of dollars, and now they are using that same money, to buy land and property all over America. they always come home to roost. Those dollars are spent best right here. Can't spend them in Europe. Not getting a good rate in Canada. The peso buys more than what it used to. So where are you going to spend those dollars? They're the most valuable domestically. Euros, same thing. You want to spend them in places where, that you get a good return. So there's nowhere better, thanks to the currency wars, to spend dollars than right here in America because of the devaluation and the political prowess of many that are shunning the dollar and using the dollar as a weapon against the United States in those using dollars, quite honestly. So, for example, there is now a proposal to construct a multi-billion-dollar China city that would span approximately 600 acres in a remote area of New York State. This China city that is actually what it would be called would be located on Yankee Lake in Sullivan County, New York. Sounds appropriate. Yankee Lake in New York, you would have a China city. The plans anticipate large numbers of Chinese businesses, plenty of homes for Chinese immigrants, a Chinese high school, a Chinese college, a casino. Got to have one of those, and even a theme park. Now, before we go any farther, let's look back to China. What do they have? They have vacant cities that the grand central planners built with lots of U.S. dollars that are, great sets for dystopic movies. They are really interesting to look at on Google Maps and to look at the failed policies of central control, of trying to build things so that they will come. And it's also a testament to the complete disconnect with real markets, free markets, and the controlled economy that you have there. The people that they built these homes for do not exist. The middle class that could afford these homes, the upkeep, the taxes, all of the other things that go into it. Water's not cheap. You got to pay somebody to pick up the trash. You cannot be working for Foxconn, living in a dormitory, and afford a 3-bedroom home in one of these ghost towns. So what happens? It's really interesting because you see that if you build something and you do not have people that actually occupy it and human beings taking care of it, that it immediately just starts to corrode and break down. And that's what you have there. So when we hear these stories about China building cities here in the U.S., I'm wondering, I'm like, how's this going to work out? You're going to get Chinese immigrants over here to do work? Once they get over here, they want the American dream. Okay, that's the point. It's hard to keep them in the factory in China City. Who knows? It's hard it's hard to keep their dollars in the China City. We see that with our friends south of the border from Mexico. They do spend a lot of money here because they're living here, but a lot of the money, more of the money goes to Mexico. So who's really benefiting? Well, the American people get cheap, almost slave labor, and the people that are immigrating here are able to take those dollars and export them to countries where they're actually worth more money. You notice that the labor and the correlation to currency. Wherever the dollar is really strong, the labor is really cheap. Imagine that. So the plans anticipate these large numbers of Chinese businesses, whether they come or not. That is questionable, though there are many, many, many politicians and other government employees that have billions of U.S. dollars that they have received or created illegally in China, and they need to get the hell out of there. So, but those people are probably not going to the China camp. They're probably buying, prime real estate in places like London, the U.S., or just buying houses on the cheap, hoping to maybe flip them, hoping to put their money into something in a place like Detroit. So anyway, there's a few phases to this project. First one is 600 acres, pretty big. Ultimately, the goal is for China City to cover more than 2,000 acres. Those promoting this plan say it will be a great way for New Yorkers to learn to appreciate Chinese culture. Now, who doesn't like some great Chinese food? crab rangoons, a little little sesame chicken. I mean, getting Americans to appreciate Chinese culture. Can't get Americans to appreciate Americana culture, or even their own cultures necessarily. But these are all just selling points. We're gonna turn it into Little Tokyo or Little China. People are like, oh yes, it's gonna be great. Yeah, well, they're selling this. So before you get too excited about the cultural immersion aspect of all of this, because it's not going to happen. And these are just the brochure for all this. Should we really be allowing our nation, Michael asked, especially ones that publish maps showing what will happen when they nuke us, to be setting up self-sustaining communities inside of our own country that have no intention of integrating into the wider culture? Most people don't come to this country ready to integrate. Maybe they do. I had a buddy of mine, good friend. I want to thank him for all of the help he gave me and the family moving into our new home. Good buddy of mine named Dan, and his mother. I hate to talk about his mother or his grandmother on the podcast, but she was from Hungary, and she didn't like any of the other races. She lived in New Jersey her whole life, and she didn't even like the Irish. Okay, so the Irish were like really undesirable people. Goes to show you how old she was. I mean, when you think about that, I mean, how racism transcends through the generations. She's so racist, she hates white people. And that also shows how the mentality changes. But Irish people were not considered. They were right down there with, I guess, the more despised groups that are coming into this country. And people from China, I don't think are going to be welcomed with the open arms by many. But that's why they probably won't integrate. They'll stay in their own little community. And I mean, you see that now. I mean, you have different sections of the city I live in where there's different ethnic groups. People just, despite all of the political correctness and the cultural diversity that central government tries to force upon us, it doesn't really work. I mean, because you want to hang out with people that have similar interests or similar backgrounds. It's just kind of common. I mean, if you're a skateboarder, you don't want to hang out with a bunch of nerds. You want to find other skateboarders. And if you're a nerd like myself, you're not going to be doing any tricks on a half pipe anytime soon. It has nothing to do with my skin color necessarily, but just interests. Just, being familiar with other people, liking certain types of food, those kind of things. It could be ethnic or could be based on culture, but I think that more people are worried about those that don't want to accept the American culture, which I don't get really, because what's the American culture today that they should be assimilating into? Consumerism, corporatocracy, America, social networks that are Ponzi schemes, apple pie, breads and circuses. I mean, it's definitely not the Bill of Rights and Constitution that are hailed by most as integration. We don't say, well, these people have integrated really well because they love the Second Amendment. Now, if they do, maybe they've integrated in my mind. I mean, that's what it means to be American, to value our system, not even necessarily the economic and territorial boundaries of the United States of America, because those are expanding, right? I mean, we bought Alaska. We have Puerto Rico, which is it's going to be the next big bailout. I think a lot of these economic time bombs and bubbles will all kind of burst at one time. But Puerto Rico, if you've been looking into the latest, it's one of these. It's not quite. We don't give them. It's a testament to bad U.S. interventionism and imperialism. They use the dollar, but they don't have all the same rights as a normal average American. But they're basically at the mercy of the U.S., and they are economically dependent upon you and I and our tax base and incentives that they receive, and, of course, military operations on their island. A lot of Puerto Ricans that are not really that excited about. Obviously, when I was in the military, they were not thrilled that we used Cape Viegas to basically bomb the hell out of. Let's be honest, it's pretty irritating to have a bunch of Navy ships blowing up something not too far away from you and having to listen to that all day long. But my point is that really the expansion of America and through globalization, what does it even mean to be American? And when we look at these things and people really, you should be fearful not of Chinese people living in this country that are going to try to suck the freedom from your children, but rather looking at what is happening in this country and this transition and why is it so profitable to sell out the American people? Why is it so unprofitable to just pay people a decent living? And it's not because businesses or evil corporate CEOs and all of this don't necessarily want to. They just want to empower themselves, and they want at the expense and the dispense of others. I mean, there is some of that, but when China builds a city in Africa, they're like, oh, people think that that's progressive. Or when they go to Lukashenko and they propose building $1 billion Chinese city in the Ukraine or in, I'm trying to think of some of the other places. There's a bunch of them where they're building these huge Chinese cities. So it's not just the United States of America. It's just an economic opportunity, and the corporate whores that want to make some profit and local people that are going to benefit are always going to be welcoming foreign investment. Dollars leave. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie Network, and if you haven't, you should. There's this great little rundown by Ned Beatty where he breaks down the ebb and flow of global economics and dollars leaving this country and coming back to this country, and how that is how it has to be. It's the grand plan, and to disturb these forces, I paraphrase, of course, of natural law, natural phenomena, is to upset the gods. And I've actually got a clip of it here somewhere, Ned Beatty. Yeah, it's pretty telling. All right, so enough about the American dream and where it's being lost, or where it turns into a nightmare in this country. I mean, Congress proposing to almost double federal gasoline taxes. This is another tax on the American people. Okay, this is another way to get you out of your cars and into whatever low carbon utopia your city council is proposing. Here we have one where a select few elite rich people get to ride around on trains in central downtown Austin at the expense of all of the other taxpayers. And that's what it is. Some people say, well, it's evil, it's the New World Order, they're trying to, well, that too, but really it's a bunch of rich people that want you to pay for their grandiose little shopping expeditions because they have the time and they have the opportunity to make sure that they can shop and ride around on the light rail that doesn't serve the greater metro area. Why, oh, why? Well, it's not always Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger behind every grand plan in the UN Agenda 21, but those people and plans definitely play into this whole grander idea that we can save the world by just taxing the crap out of you and making you poor. Bill Clinton, just to bag on him one more time, said that the economic crisis that we saw in 2008 is good because it would deindustrialize America, and that would make us produce less carbon. Amazing. So, Hillary 2016, death of America, destruction of the economic base. Some people think it's a bad thing that we have Americans starving, we have poverty and the welfare state expanding at epic proportions in this country. Some people like Bill Clinton think it's a great thing. So, you always hear that there has been accountability, that somebody has atoned for the Wall Street crimes. And there was a few Wall Street convictions that I hear a lot of these guys that are really sympathists or apologists for Wall Street, harking to, going back to over and over again. You may have heard of Dominique Carrillo, Stephen Goldberg, or Peter Grimm. They were these mid-level players at GE Capital. They got caught up in the scam at Wachovia and at Bank of America. They basically skimmed billions of dollars from American cities and towns by rigging auctions. And these guys were not just stealing from the investors, people gambling and betting on Wall Street, high risk, high reward. We're talking about municipalities. We're talking about cities like Detroit that are in a bad way, and they're having to make really horrible decisions that are affecting people, real people. Okay, not just investors, not some algo trader, some cheetah trading system. We're talking about people's pensions, people's livelihood, and their ability to pay their bills and to keep the system afloat. I mean, that's what it really comes down to, doesn't it? It's whether or not we can sustain the current system. And because we cannot, what is it going to become, and who is going to be hurt by this? Who falls into the victim category when all of this comes to fruition? So the case was actually 10 years in the making. It involved offenses that took place long before the crash in 2008. All three defendants were convicted in May of 2012, with Goldberg ultimately getting 4 years and the other two getting 3 years. Seems like, pretty light sentence. You can do a lot more time for something really petty that doesn't affect tens of thousands of people. I mean, you can do more time for selling cannabis or maybe having an illegal firearm, something that crimes that are pretty harmless. Somebody says, "Oh, well, a firearm, kind of a felon." Yeah, I mean, if you shoot somebody, that's really bad. It's really bad. Just because you have a firearm doesn't mean that you've, in my mind, done anything wrong. Oh, yeah, well, you can't have it in the car. Why? I mean, if you shoot people, you shoot innocent victims, you shoot people for no reason, you're not defending yourself, then you've committed a crime. But other than that, I mean, it's just more and more victimless crimes and putting people into the corporate prison system. Well, let's be honest. Wall Street executives, they're not going to, make a lot of Starbucks cups or help AT&T all that well with customer service. I mean, these guys are, white-collar criminals. They're not very useful. That's what they would like you to think. Not very useful to the CCA, the Criminal Corporation of America. I think it's actually the CCA. Forget what the acronym is, but nonetheless, more people sliding out the back door. So we thought we had convictions, and I thought that it was pretty sleazy to bring them out in 2012 because many people were led to believe that they were actually some of the culprits behind the crash in 2008. Meanwhile, people like George W. Bush, I would give him plenty of credit for the crash, the housing crisis that we saw in 2008 that affected not just the people of this country, but sent a shockwave across the globe and was the largest redistribution of wealth ever. Yeah, they're off the hook. This week, the Tyco executive, he was able to get out. He spent some time in prison, though. He must have angered some pretty big wigs. Or, well, if you do what the cardinal saying, you steal from bankers, you steal from Hollywood elite, you will pay the price. Just ask Mr. Madoff, one of the few people, and he was just a hedge fund manager, And he was ripping off rich people, not average Americans, not pension systems. He was ripping off Kevin Bacon. He was ripping off other Wall Street elite. And that's why he found himself in prison. And, well, and that's why his son committed suicide. He was so embarrassed, on and on and on. So anyway, let's talk about the New World Order. Well, real quickly here. We're about to wrap it up. We got about, another 5 minutes or so. Let's talk about big money and global power. World Trade Organization in crisis. Have you heard about the WTO, World Trade Organization? Some of you may have. Some of you may be much more aware, and probably are, than I am, of the machinations of those countries and the grander system. The World Trade Organization is really, global government personified. They control a lot. Global trade. Right. When we talk about TPP controlling 40% of the global economy, and we're talking about $40 trillion annually. Just these huge, crazy numbers that we throw out there that are just so grandiose that I myself and probably most of you could never even imagine what it would look like to even have $1 trillion. You try to look at those infographics and those little representations. Well, if you had just $100 bills, they would be stacked up, higher than the Twin Towers or the New World Order Freedom Tower that they have today. You're like, wow, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. It's to the point where it's just infinity. It doesn't even matter. Well, anyway, there's a summit. Most people won't be talking about this in Indonesia, the World Trade Organization. They're having some problems. Security is tight on the island of Bali as trade ministers from the World Trade Organization are gathering for their 4-day meeting. The meeting is crucial for the future of the World Trade Organization. This, according to the Investment Watch blog. Last week on Monday, marathon talks were finally brought to a close in Geneva, Switzerland, without a consensus being reached. It is thought that if now the trade ministers of the 159 member states, still cannot thrash out an agreement, the World Trade Organization will gradually slide into irrelevance. Yes, it's good. Basically, you have a bunch of people at the top that are using this organization as a political tool as well as a weapon to target dissenters, to target those that do not want to come into the SWIFT bank system, that are not playing into central bank markets, and they're not putting into the UN. The World Trade Organization, they are the guys that make the rules. They are the regulators. Now, they have had a lot of problems recently because guess what? People are tired of the World Trade Organization. They don't want to have to deal with all of the rigmarole, and they don't necessarily see the benefits. That's what it ultimately comes down to. Pay me. I'm not making any money. This isn't helping me out politically. So the World Trade Organization, they are really the market when it comes to physical goods and energy. The influence is waning, but they're like the OPEC cartel. They're like the IMF. They're like the World Bank, except they are the regulators. Well, they are slipping into basically just irrelevance and the inability to regulate and to keep people in consensus is I think, great. Because if you want a freer, more independent economy, if you want a better deal for the products that you're paying for today, if you want more economic freedoms, the World Trade Organization is your enemy. Now, there are some other things that are happening here, too. The international commerce, they did come to this agreement. It's falling apart, but they have this landmark trade deal that they are working on, as I said. And more countries are bowing out, but the World Trade Organization has moved forward with this landmark decision, if you will. This is basically commerce ministers, which are the money men, the bankster gangsters that have this agreement. Now, will it really work? Is this going to be able to fit into the TPP framework? I don't think so. I really think that if you look at the coverage from AFP, these guys are dancing. They're so excited about this deal, but the power balance and shift is already occurring. When you look at what's happening on the ground, it's exactly what you thought it would be. Here's one example. French President Hollande warns of immediate military intervention hours after reporting soaring unemployment. So when your socialist revolution, change that the French people can believe in, fails, okay, when you have this failure of epic proportions, there's always the other final solution, and that is war, war, war. We talked a lot about apartheid and what Nelson Mandela's life meant to the current parallels or the current struggles of the people, and some of the parallels here between apartheid and what the French, who are they are the they are imperialism personified. They are really doing everything they can to hold their system of power and their government together, but they are failing. So the next big wave of cash and relevance in their minds is in Africa. It always has been. And so they're trying to protect these colonies of yesteryear, and they're trying to grasp on to the last century. They're trying to go back in time, and they are trying to make some dough. And they need to get those people occupied once again. You can't have everybody out in the street setting things on fire. Let's get them into a war. So this could pop off into a huge regional war. The intervention and the work that they've been doing with AFRICOM, their role in AFRICOM is ever expanding. But this came out of Zero Hedge. While we are sure, while we are sure it is just a coincidence that hours after the nation reports record-soaring unemployment rates, French President Hollande announces a doubling of troops in the Central African Republic, deciding to, quote, intervene immediately after the UN authorization, adding, quote, this intervention will be quick, it has no vocation to last, and I'm sure it will be a success. So this is a surge. This is the injection of power and military dominance into the region, and that always works, right? We've seen that here in the U.S. I mean, Afghanistan, we had a surge, and what happened? We had a surge in opium. So more troops, more drugs, more opium, and more people on drugs. And anyway, the U.S. State Department is backing them 100%. Quote, they welcome France's decision to reinforce its military presence, which is shocking, right? Adding that the U.S. is appalled by today's reports of the murder of innocent women and children outside of Bangui. Of course, it would be the modern-day war. It wouldn't be one without drones. Now, if you didn't hear, the United Nations is going to be operating its own drone fleet. Of course, they need to get on the ground. They need to find out what's happening in Africa because they want to help the African people. So, that's going to be their solution. More war, more intervention, more central planning, and, of course, all of those corporate backers and sponsors will be extracting all of those rare minerals, resources, and wealth. Okay, the Congo Wars, the PlayStation Wars, and all of those grabs for resources for the technocracy that we live in today. The technology that we love. It's coming out of Africa. It's going to be the next big thing, and it's really, really telling. We got a problem. We don't have any jobs. What are we going to do? We're going to start up the war machine, and that's why I think myself and many others believe that we're going to see a war being the ultimate solution to economic problems and bad planning. And that's why I am such a big proponent of putting those people that steal, those people that are in government, that are using their power to oppress others, we have to put them in jail and hold them accountable. Why? Because if we don't, then we have war. We have death, and we have a system where the only jobs, and that's what's happening in this country, the only jobs that you have are in the only economy that's left is either spying on one another or working and building something for the war. If you look at a state like Arizona, Raytheon, Boeing, many of these companies that make weapons, manufacturers, Spa War, those are the biggest tax base and job creators in those states. So, when you have everybody that's on the war teat and enjoying the daddy war bucks, you're not going to have a free people that are interested in peace and prosperity, but rather in war and profit. There's a lot of war and there's a lot of profit, but it's not coming down to the people that really are the cogs. It's not for you out there, the general workers, and the people like myself and you out there listening to this podcast don't benefit from these policies. Okay, no one benefits from these policies. All they are doing is propping up this failed system that has been operating for thousands of years. War and fiat money. War and fiat money. And I think that we could do better. It is the 21st century. We have computers. We have technology. We have the ability to even do podcasts like this show live on platforms like Ustream so that we can talk about issues like this, so that we can actually explore and talk about ideas that are really going to be solutions for the future. Not more war, not oppressing people, not enslaving people, but actually finding ways that we can trade and mutually enhance each other's lives. That's what it should be about. Unfortunately, there's a lot of money in war and slavery right now. I wish war and slavery wasn't nearly as profitable as it has become, but that is the old model. That's what they're trying to hold on to. That's what the World Trade Organization is all about, and that's what I think that's why a lot of people really do respect a person like Nelson Mandela, because if nothing else, he symbolizes change. He symbolizes in the minds of millions a person that can, through his singular actions, can change the world and to change the perspective of millions of people. And that he did. I will give him that. So before all of you just start sending in hate mail, because I'm not drinking the Nelson Mandela Kool-Aid, that I do respect and I do appreciate the things that he was able to accomplish. But then again, I could say the same for Genghis Khan. I could say the same for George W. Bush. You can appreciate, the guy got us into a $6 trillion war and conned the mainstream media, and he wasn't that bright. You can appreciate those things. You can appreciate somebody who's a grand mastermind, bank robber, or, the effort that he's put into the bank robbery. So you can appreciate it, but you shouldn't celebrate it. You shouldn't relish it. And you sure as heck shouldn't tell your children that those type of people are heroes, because, well, we'll be right back in the same exact situation that we're in today. But it's changing. It's moving forward. And the debate will be whether it is moving in a good direction or a bad direction. That's always the debate. I want to thank all of you listening live at blacklistedradio.com. And until next time, take care.